Hello, and welcome to season 2, episode 1 of Taking Back the Narrative podcast. Today's topic is just so paramount to what is going on today in the Zionism space. So today's topic is called The Sorry State of On-Campus Zionism Education. Now, to date myself, I just turned 40 this year. And so, in a way, I was quote unquote lucky to get through my undergrad without any significant anti Israel activity. I spent the majority of my undergrad years at American University before they turned woke recently. I would say post 2014, 2015. And so I remember there was one skirmish on campus when something was happening uh, between Israel and Hamas. And I say that intentionally because I was not paying attention back then. As some of you know who are listening, I was anti-Israel for 20 years. And I became a Zionist in 2014. So in my college years, whatever was happening was quote unquote over there. But I do remember there was a skirmish. I think this was 2003. And the Muslim Student Association had a rally on the quad. Within 5 minutes, Hillel shows up with 5 times the amount of people. And whatever issues the Muslim Student Association had quickly dissipated. That's how strong Hillel was back then. And so I think this topic is important because, as I mentioned, I was anti-Israel for 20 years. And my experience with anti-Zionism and who and what influenced me could be bifurcated in a way. So I would say the first 10 years of that anti-Israel sentiment was absolutely due to the media, due to the publications that I had read, the New York Times, The Economist, uh, watching a steady diet of CNN. However, when I moved to New York, surrounded by more Jews, I joined Jewish organizations. And it was through those Jewish organizations that used anti Semitic terminology like Palestinians, West Bank, settlements. For example, let's start with Palestinians, right? So, first of all, none of them explained that it was a 1967 KGB a term used to delegitimize Israel. And so when people hear Palestinians, they think, well, every group has a homeland. And so naturally, I, like many others, thought erroneously that their homeland must be Palestine and the Jews are stealing Palestinian land. It logistically makes sense when you hear that incorrect terminology. And so even when I became a Zionist and I joined more pro-Israel uh, seemingly Zionist organizations, they also were using incorrect terminology. And they were not mentioning the history of Israel. Like, most were not mentioning the British occupation, the Ottoman occupation, the fact that Jews have had a continuous presence in Israel, that even during the most murderous exile, not all Jews were actually exiled. Many had stayed behind, built up communities. Not many talk about how the Sephardic population held down the proverbial fort in Israel. And it wasn't just empty space that the Jews just happened to come back to. And so I was talking about this with our guest, Marlene Artov, recently, and then throughout our recent friendship as well, that if this is how I, as an adult, experienced a lot of these Jewish organizations, then what is happening with their on campus divisions? And so I know that in my own experience in grad school at Columbia, I was in the nonprofit management program. So we didn't broach anything about Israel. We didn't talk about politics, but I do remember visiting the women's bathroom at one point and seeing a swastika on one of the stalls. And around the swastika, it said, fuck Israel with a big circle. And I remember complaining to the administration and they just passed me off. And then I contacted Hillel, thinking that was the point, the point group of pro-Israel issues, of Jewish concerns on campus. And so they had a Israel development even director to contact. And so I contacted her for a meeting, and we met, and I was shocked, absolutely shocked to hear what she said. And she said, we don't even fly the flag of Israel, forget about it, outside of Hillel's building, but even inside. And I said, what do you mean? It's Hillel. And she said, oh, so you don't know who our constituency is, right? And I said, please, please explain. And I said that with trepidation. And she said, mostly our constituency are J Street people who we are trying not to have them become JDP. And our donors are moving to the left, and they are not very pro-Israel. They, at least this Hillel chapter wants to just be more Jewish, even though being a Jew and being pro-Israel are intrinsically tied together. And it was so sad to hear, to meet with her, because she said, like, look, I'm Israeli. I served in the IDF. My brothers served in combat in the IDF, and here I am. I can't just quit my job. I have a family to support, and I'm dealing with pretty much like a hostile donor base who does not want Hillel to participate in correct Zionism education on campus. So I'm honored to introduce Marlene Artov. She was the former ZOA director of Young Professionals and campus coordinator. Marlene, I'm so honored to also share that she was the education associate for this past winter's Taking Back the Narrative class called Israel Explained Through the Lens of History. So Marlene, welcome, and I am honored to have you. So please describe how you grew up in terms of Zionism, your family, community influence, and please share your story with the audience.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My story is also unique in its own ways, but many similarities to your epiphanies, Laureen, as well. So I grew up in a Russian Jewish home. My family came from the former Soviet Union. Grew up Russian speaking, never spoke Hebrew. We were Zionist in theory, maybe like love Israel, went on birthright, but went to public school my whole life, didn't really observe too many of the holidays. And in public school, as those that went to public school know, there was not a lot of Israel education taking place. I remember it started coming up in the media a little bit when I was in high school, and I went to my history, humanities, whatever it was called back in high school. Teacher, I was like, can you explain what's going on? And she didn't have any resources for me. So I would just go on Wikipedia. And I remember being so confused. I'm like, so it's Israel, but it's Palestine, but it's the same land. And I don't understand what's going on. But I had what I would call a Jewish identity journey when I went to college. So I went to NYU for undergrad and then for grad as well. Also got my master's in public administration. So similar to you. And during my undergraduate career, I got very involved in Jewish life, kind of by accident. Like really, a rabbi found me on the stairs, was like, please take these classes. We'll give you free dinners. You can get a free trip to Israel. And I was like, wow, I'm in college. I'm not making any money. Of course, I will take you up on this free food. And I had a very intensive Jewish education during my undergraduate career, not through Hillel, but through a group called Meor, which is through the Olami organizations. And I was very lucky that my education was holistic. And what I mean by that is, yes, we studied Torah. Yes, it was very faith-based and religious-based, but it always was this idea that Jews are more than a religion, that and that was very, very much ingrained in me. I also started getting involved in RAGE, which stands for Russian American Jewish Experience. And the rabbis there really, really push this idea as well, which I completely agree with. And I think it's so important to Jewish identity, that whatever you observe, that's between you and God and you and your home and whatever else. But Jews are a people. And if we're a people, we come from a place, right? Civilizations arise in a specific area. with very few exceptions of that. Maybe nomadic groups, but other than that, very, very few exceptions. And so through that journey, that's where my Zionism came from, was like, oh, well, I am Jewish. I have this Jewish identity. I now feel like I walk the world as a Jew, but Jews are from Judea. And so simultaneously as that was happening, I went to NYU and there was a lot of anti-Semitism happening. I remember there was a group called Realize Israel. It just started up when I was a sophomore there. I was kind of part of it as well, one of the first members, first cohort. And we did something for Yom Ha'atzmaut called Rally in the Park, which we still do today. And by the time I was a senior, the anti-Semitism got so bad that the JVP there took the flags and burned them, like during our Yom Ha'atzmaut party. When I started my professional career, I actually worked for Olami for a little bit toward the end of college. And so that's where my introduction to the campus world started. And I remember I went to, I believe it was the University of Maryland, and the kids there that were telling me, the ones that I was mentoring or coordinating, whatever you want to call it, they told me like, oh, our sukkah this year got desecrated with the words Free Gaza on our sukkah. And like, we don't know what that means. We don't know what to do. Like, how do we fight that back? Why are they even saying that? Like, what does Sukkot have to do with Israel? Like, we don't even understand. So that was definitely the climate when I was in my undergraduate career. And then my first 2 years at ZOA, I continued my career in the campus world as a campus coordinator. And that sentiment definitely got worse and continued on college campuses.
So it's interesting you mentioned Raj, and just like you know, I'm first generation American. Both my parents immigrated here from Belarus. And I remember growing up and hearing my parents lament that on their passports in Belarus, it didn't say Belarusian, it said Jew for ethnicity. And, you know, of course, like when my parents told me that, I was like, oh my gosh, it's so anti-Semitic. And of course, you know, like, as we all know, the communists were anti-Semitic during Stalin and post-Stalin. There was a major shift around that time, because I know that my grandmother was saying that when she was in school, it was punishable to be anti-Semitic. Like if anyone said Zhid, you know, that means kike in Russian, to a Jew, they would be expelled without even question. And then of course, like Stalin upended all of that. But the point I'm trying to make is that now that we are so secure in identity and we understand that Judaism is not a religion, we're a people that has a faith and has customs. On that one thing, you know, I'm wholly against communism. I know you are too. That one thing, they got correct, right?
Yes.
So that they pointed out. And I love how you said your Jewish identity. I think too many American Jews who fill up these organizations that we're going to be talking about, they look at themselves, and this is what I did when I was, you know, when I was walking around as an anti-Israel ignorant Jew, not knowing that I was a Jew in a way, is that they look at it only as a religion, and those who are not religious, more so, like, you know, their correct word is observant. They look at Israel as, okay, well, that's the place for observant Jews. I'm not observant, so let me wash my hands of this identity. They call themselves white, like I did, you know, for 20 years. So, you know, like I'm white, I'm American, Israel's over there, right? And so it's that identity that's so important for more Jews to understand. And I also wanted to pinpoint Realize Israel. I love that group. When I was part of Camera, we did a couple, maybe you were there actually, because I was part of, were you there between 2016 and 2018 by any chance?
Yes.
I then saw you, but didn't realize who you were. We met at ZOA. So I love Realize Israel. And you know, we wouldn't have these issues if every single Jewish organization, if every single on-campus group was like Realize Israel. So whatever they're doing, they need to bottle it up. They need to spread it far and wide. So I don't want our audience to think that all on-campus groups
No,
are
definitely not.
worthy. That one is amazing. And I hope that they have the funding and continue to grow. So speaking of groups, right? It's like we mentioned Hillel, we mentioned Realize Israel. So Hillel does seem to be the standard bearer on campuses. So when did these other Zionism groups spring up, and what was the need for them? Like, was it anti-Semitism? Was it another impetus? In your opinion, what do you think
I
happened?
think it's a little bit challenging to exactly pinpoint the cause and effect. I think that everything happened at once. If you look at general public, like the Pew research surveys, if you look at the general public's opinion on Israel, that has been decreasing over the past few years. There is now a very popular, called like a Hasbara study, but every Jewish organization like say, oh, like people have more, maybe not anymore because the study was before the war, but people have more positive opinions of Russia and North Korea than of Israel. Like if
Wow.
you ask, thumbs up or thumbs down. So the general opinion of Israel is going down. Anti-Semitism is slowly going up. BDS is making its way into law, like whether for good or for bad. We actually have states like Florida that have like kind of in their own way outlawed BDS, said not in my state, but that was never, you never needed to do that prior. So I think everything started happening at once. A lot of these organizations like ZOA are very, very old. They're not new. Some are new, but some are quite old. But this idea of having a campus division, everything, in my opinion, happened at once, especially from the nonprofit sector, because what happens is an organization like Camera, an organization like ZOA, an organization like Stand With Us, they do a lot more than just campus. They'll have a campus division, a high school division, a young professionals division, a development division, a marketing division, right? Different. They're quite large organizations, but most of them, their campus organizations and campus involvement is 10 years old at max, maybe even less than that. So it's a new need, and it also comes from donors as well, which I've learned donors love to see these nonprofits being out, having more young people. I think that's not just in the Jewish world, that's across the board. We're just having more political activity on college campuses as well, that everyone wants their 2 cents in the young minds and like the future leaders of our country. Everyone wants to get them early. So I do see that nonprofits, even across the board, not just Jewish in Israel, getting more and more involved on college campuses as well. So it's hard to pinpoint the cause and effect, but overall, it definitely is something new, but it's not uniquely Jewish and pro-Israel. It's overall the political activity on college campuses as well.
That's a really interesting point because I was thinking, and this is not to, push back on what you said, but maybe like to add is that, the Muslim Student Association, Student for Justice of Peace,
Mhm.
those groups have been increasing. But I'm also wondering, right, because a lot of these Jewish organizations, even though we disagree with their methodology of teaching and maybe how effective and ineffective they
Mhm.
are, but the growing rise of these Jewish anti-Israel groups, that's something that we need to talk about as well. Like, the J Street, the JVP, if
Yes.
not now, right? That's also
Breaking the silence, another
breaking
one.
the silence, right? And then there's these Israeli groups, which just shocking. Right? Like someone had told me years ago, he was an Indian American man, and he said it's only Jews and Indians from India, who have self-hating populations. He said no one else. So you'll never go to Europe and meet an Italian person who's self-hating against their homeland. It just doesn't happen, right? Like you're
Mhm.
not going to meet a Brazilian who's anti-Brazil. So unfortunately, we're in this very unique space.
Americans, I would say, though, are moving that way too, though, as
Right.
well. You have Americans that are saying, I love America, I want change, but you have quite a few Americans that are saying that don't feel that way. So
But we're,
Americans moving
but
that way
we're
as well.
also true, but Americans are not an ethnicity, right? We're a nationality.
Correct.
Like we're just very unique, right? Because like everyone comes here becomes American, but I'm talking about like ethnic, countries.
Hmm.
And so, and especially like you would think that Jews, given all this misinformation, would stick together and know their history and act accordingly. But I mean, like I was one of them, right? And I fell victim also. And that's the thing too, like people say that so many others are anti-Semitic, but are they really, or are they just misinformed, right? Like if you ask the average person in the street, like, do you hate Israel? They probably don't. Like, do you hate Jews? They probably don't. But it's just what they're exposed to
Hmm.
in relation to to the country, to the groups, like what they hear. So they hear something negative constantly, and then they're going to absorb that as facts. But in terms of Hillel, like I really want to go harken back because
Yes.
that meeting I had was so jarring. And again, like I know like right now I follow this young woman on Facebook, and she's she's a proud Zionist. She seems like a promising Zionism, you know, advocate, future educator, who knows, you know, like what her path could take. But she's now involved with Hillel. And so that scares me because I know that she's not being exposed to the correct education. I also am in this awkward place because I don't want to just message her and tell her how bad Hillel is,
Mhm.
right? You know, just want her to experience it herself. So my question is this. So why didn't Hillel, being this grand bearer in its place on
Yes,
campuses that
it
it
is
has been,
definitely the main big
right? Like
organization
why,
on campus.
right. So why
Absolutely.
didn't they take the lead and pivot to being actively pro-Israel? Like what was stopping them? Like is it that their donors are turning left? And I'm not saying that every single person on the left is anti-Israel, but like, you know, unfortunately the
Yes.
policies that they vote for, quite a lot of them are. So what is it? Like what do you think it's the donors that are pushing this? Do you think they just don't want to put up a fight? Do you think that they're I mean, for lack of a better word, lazy and don't want to educate their members? It just it's very confounding to a lot of people. Like why Hillel just lay down and let the ignorance spread.
Yes. So a few things to say about Hillel. The answer to the question is I think all of those things can be true and are true at once. I Hillel is a huge umbrella organization. So if someone out there is listening and you're like, my Hillel on my college campus is absolutely amazing, good for you, amazing, keep going. We love to hear that. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Columbia Hillel is not like that. NYU Hillel is definitely not like that. So most of the time, so Hillel's an umbrella organization. They funnel money to each individual Hillel on their camp, on whichever respective campus they're on, and that Hillel gets to make fairly autonomous decisions. Hillel will say, it did at least when I was there. I haven't checked their website recently, does say that they are a pro-Israel organization, just like something like Moshe House will say, like we are pro-Israel. And for those only listening, I'm putting air quotes in the on the pro-Israel or Zionist things because it's very meek. It's like in theory, we are, pro-Israel. In theory, we agree that, Jews have some kind of connection to the land, maybe in theory, but that's where their pro-Israel ideology stops. I think part of it is in general college campus politics, right? Campuses overall are moving left. That means their constituency is moving left. So Hillel does not want to rock the boat,
Mhm.
as one might say, right? If every single organization that's big, if your Black Student Union, your Muslim Student Union, your LGBT Student Center, your organization ABC, your dance club, your, African basket weaving club, whatever, if all of them have already decided they're going to be anti-Israel, Hillel just wants to exist and keep their campus money that is given to them by the university. If every organization, every other department, student department, and student activities boycotting the Hillel, they're not going to lose. They're going to lose their money. They're not going to exist. So keeping the peace for them is important, and money talks. It's also the constituency. So we are seeing a big movement from the reform movement, specifically like conservative and orthodox, not as much, but the reform and reconstructionist movements are leaning overwhelmingly less and less anti-Israel. If you look at who the J Street people are, who the JV people are, they're not just, I'm not denominational. I think they're like actively, most of them are very actively actively involved in their reform or reconstructionist movements. And we can look at the history of the reform movement. We can look at how they, wrote the Pittsburgh Manifesto in the 1800s saying that we're only a religion and we want to be Americans just like the Christians, but Jews. We can look at how their reform shuls that say it's okay to remove Israel from Torah completely. We're just not even going to say the word. And so if your student constituency is reform, then you're going to follow that as well, because the Orthodox and modern Orthodox, I mean, think about it. If you keep Shabbat, you're not gonna go to Hillel. You're gonna find a Chabad, you're gonna find an Orthodox organization. And even the Hillels that do have like NYU Hillel had always reform, conservative, and Orthodox services. But the truth is, if someone is Orthodox, they're still not going to go to that Hillel Orthodox service because they know down the hall there's a female rabbi and they don't really support that. So they don't want to support those organizations. So those like strong Orthodox, modern Orthodox, more observant Zionists are not engaging with Hillel because it's not welcoming to them from an observant standpoint, and then later on a pro-Israel standpoint. So that's important to note as well.
And it's also just it's so saddening and infuriating because the anti-Semitic trope out there is that Jews are weak, and in actuality, we're anything but. You don't survive 4,000 years given our history by being a weak people. But you have Hillel that's playing right into that trope by, like, for example, I know, like, I'll give a very specific example with Colombia, that I don't know right now if they're doing it, but they definitely were doing it right before the pandemic. That, let's say someone wanted to be part of a club, but they found out that they were pro-Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't be part of that club unless they denounced their being a
Yes.
Zionist. So this would be absolutely perfect for Hillel to flex its strength and push back on that and explain, this is not going to happen. Like, imagine that the Muslim Student Association just accepting those terms for their Muslims. They
Mm-hmm.
never, right? And they wouldn't be respected as much if they were to do that.
Yep.
So this is just a complete failure for Hillel. So speaking of failures, I look at it as this conglomerate systemic failure of most on-campus organizations. And we're talking about
Yes.
SSI, Stand With Us Campus, Hillel, other organizations that are not coming to mind right now. But let's talk about why they are currently failing as this mass group on campus. What are they doing wrong?
What are they doing right? Lorraine, is a shorter list.
Yes.
There are so many organs. So first of all, let's talk systematic, big picture, and let's really hit the nail on the head with this topic of Zionism education. Even for people that go to Jewish school, private school, whatever, there is, and for me as someone that went to public school, Israel, Middle East is nowhere in the curriculum. It's not on any standardized test. Even if you do go to Jewish school, maybe you learn a little bit about Herzl, maybe you learn about the cherry tomatoes, maybe you're more Orthodox, you want to go to yeshiva or seminary there, but there's no organization, Jewish or public or secular, before college that is giving you holistic and concrete Jewish and Zionist education, especially in Jewish schools. Really, they'll come out knowing, all of Torah and all of Talmud, but they're not coming out knowing what happened in 1948 or 1964, even before that. And these are just big common dates that everyone should know, that should always ring a bell. So
they go from, so they go from the ancient, Jewish history, biblical times, to the liberation of Israel, but they call it the real establishment. They'll call it the creation. They'll call it anything but what it actually was, which is the liberation of Israel. Okay, they're missing these 2,000 years of important historical facts,
and they're missing modern history too. They're not spending nearly as much time on the wars, what happened, insurgency, any of that in the Jewish schools either. So these kids are coming, doesn't matter your background, if it's public or Jewish school, you're coming with very, very little, very basic Jewish education onto your campus. And then there is no organization on campus that actually teaches, right? So even if you have a pro-Israel Hillel, even if it's an SSI or a Camera, actually I think is pretty good, but Camera also is very particular, right? Camera is an organization that is based about media and journalism. So it's actually not their job to teach. But then whose job whose job is it? So no organization is taking on the responsibility. And the more religious kind of Orthodox, we call them kiruv, which means like outreach organizations that do these classes, like the Maimonides Fellowship or the Sinai Scholars, right? Maybe some people have heard of that. Those are Torah learning classes. So you go in and you learn maybe, weekly parsha for an hour and this and that. So there are formal ways to teach you Torah and observance. And, kids come out of these programs being able to recite the 39 melachot of Shabbat off the top of their heads, but there is no one being like, let's do the same thing for Israel education. Let's, do a 10 class chronological course where you learn everything. No one's giving the course that you gave on college campuses, and no organization is taking the responsibility to do it. They are creeping in now. I think people are talking about this problem now. There is no formal education. So there are some, like Club Z is doing it a little bit for high school kids. Fuel for Truth is doing it a little bit for young professionals. But we can definitely talk about the quality, what's really going. When you have a different guest speaker every week, are you really, really, discussing Jewish identity and connection to Israel? I mean, the courses, just the quality of the courses are not there. And no organization has really jumped up and said, like, we're going to do this specifically on campus with college kids and make sure they know what they have to know. And there's more systematic failures also with organizations like the Jewish Agency, which I really do want to take a second and point out
Absolutely.
in the podcast. So for those listening, if you have kids, grandkids on college campuses, ask about the Shlichut program, which basically what that means, Hillel is a big part of this. The Jewish Agency, which everyone knows has a bunch of Israelis, young Israelis, just after the army, pre-university on their end. So they're probably the same age as those college kids. They basically take them, they train them, training is in air quotes, and they plant them into random colleges, right? So you go to Brooklyn College, you go to Rutgers, you go to Stanford, and they work within the Hillel, and their title is Israel Fellow, and it's a 2 to 3 year position. I found that there are exceptions, there are really amazing ones, but I found that these Israel Fellows have the same problems as the Hillel, and they come in, and oftentimes the Israel Fellow has nothing in common with the community. They don't want to rock the boat. They're scared. They have no idea about college campuses and what's going on. These apartheid walls, apartheid weeks, and die-ins are absolute shockers for them, right? They had literally Rashida Tlaib at Rutgers one year. Like, this is not anything that these Israel Fellows are prepared for, and they end up doing more harm than help, because students will come and say, like, we want to protest, we want to do these big events, we want to talk about, no two-state solution, it's a Jewish state. And these Jewish fellows, which are, again, they're the Israel Fellow, their Israel programming is literally their job on college campuses, and they just don't want to rock the boat. They want to do their 2 years, have a good time, have an easy job, and get out. And I think the fact that they're here on such short term makes it worse, because they're doing damage on the campus, and then they're leaving, and then a new one comes in.
That's an excellent point. Like, you educated me, because I don't know anything about the Jewish Agency at all. Like, to me, I thought they just were involved with Aliyah and that's about it. But no, like, thank you so much. I'm sure like the audience is learning from that as well. I would like to add too, I think some of it's the need to please, right? Like, they need to please their donors. And like you said, like, it's part of the community. They don't want to rock the boat. Another thing too is, and I just had a meeting this morning. Okay, we're going all out. Like, we're not sugarcoating this podcast.
No.
Actually, none of the episodes, for those who've been listening since season 1, have been sugarcoated. We call out all offenders. So just this morning, I had a meeting with Stand With Us. It was a good meeting, better than expected. But in the meeting, I had asked, who is educating the educators at Stand With Us? And so the answer was, like a very packaged one, like, oh, that we grill them at the interview, make sure that they're not giving incorrect information. And I said, well, okay, I thank you for doing that. However, when I look at the posts from Stand With Us across social media platforms, I see nonstop anti-Semitic terminology. So it's not the interview that's the issue, it's the baseline knowledge. And so they said, like, oh, well, we also have our own curriculum, and we make sure that the educators are not misrepresenting facts. And again, I pushed back. I said, okay, well, who's writing these posts then? Right? I know it's not Chat GPT here. So that's the problem, is like, no one is educating the educators, and the so-called educators don't know information. And I'll give you another example. SSI. So when SSI first was established at Columbia, I was excited. Oh my gosh, and like, here's this pros organization. This is great. And Rudy Rockman, who I and many others go against, since he had turned against being a real Zionist. Like, I mean, he does slogan Zionism, but he also thinks that Palestinians are a group and a ethnicity. And now, it's like kumbaya both sides, and adding to anti-Semitic messaging. So there's this video of Rudy Rockman tabling. It was across the quad from Apartheid Week. I forgot who had, put on Apartheid Week. Like, it's different organizations, different years. And all he was saying was, Israel is a great country, beautiful country. I mean, like, again, like the slogan Zionism, like repeating and repeating. Meanwhile, across the quad, what is Apartheid Week doing? Showing pictures of fake dead children from the Syrian war, right? And everyone, who knows, right? So everyone passing by is jarred from those images, thinking, you know what? And if I were passing by and I didn't know better, I would also think Israel is an evil, Zionist entity. It
Absolutely.
needs to be done away with. But I have to share this video. I'm going to try to include it maybe as a link. Then you have my favorite Zionists, and this is so sad that my favorite Zionists these days, none of them are Jews. They're all Muslims. All of them are Muslim Arabs. And so there's this one man, I hope everyone follows him, Mohammed Kabia. I cannot say enough good things about him. He's a proud Bedouin. He served in the IAF. He's very proud Israeli citizen. He had shared that his family goes back generations as a partner with Israel. They made a blood pact in 1948. They hold very, very honored to have that. He lost many members of his family, to the wars, to several terror attacks. So, like many Bedouins, they're part and parcel of Israeli society. So, anyway, so he was there with SSI, and he was schooling an Israeli Jewish student who had come up to Rudy and had said, well, Israel does this and Israel does that. And what about the Palestinians? Rudy, like a parrot, just was like, oh, but Israel's beautiful people and beautiful country, and like this like package, like Hallmark, messaging. And Muhammad comes in and like literally schools him on Israeli history. That he, as an Israeli Jew, that this random, self-hating Jew didn't know about. So like, how is it that non-Jews, a lot of Muslims, know our history better than we do, right? Those are people that should be helming these organizations. And another issue with SSI, again, it's the terminology. And so I had reached out to Elon, numerous times. And so he finally granted me a meeting. He's okay, would love to have a conversation with you. Okay, great. So we were on the phone and he was very cordial. I have to say, like, he's a nice guy and nothing gets him personally. But I told him the issues and he said, okay, fine. So why don't you look through our website? Let me know if you have any corrections and we'll take it from there. Okay, great. So I took, a couple of days, looked through very thoroughly through their website, and it was all over the place in terms of terminology. Like in some parts they say Judea and Samaria, but in every other part it says West Bank. They don't mention how there is no apartheid. They don't explain Judea and Samaria. Like the list is lengthy. And so I reached out to him and like nothing, right? And then cut to Biden's trip, like a year ago, like at this point, like almost a year ago, it was the last summer, right? To Israel. And this was the infamous trip where he was exploring having a consulate to the freaking terrorist Palestinian Authority and placing it in Jerusalem. And I was shocked that Elon had been posting positively about Biden and the trip. And turns out he told me like, oh, like I'm helping coordinate the trip. So things are not making sense here in terms of, being pro-Israel, because like if he were serious about being, pro-Israel, he would maybe course correct that or maybe like not be involved so much.
I really want to touch on
Yeah.
what you said about slogan Zionism, because that to me, that is the systematic failure that organizations have not yet, while they say they understand, they through their actions have not yet embraced that activism and advocacy and education are all very much combined. So that's what people mean when they say Jewish groups are always on the defensive. Because they're like, oh, if JVP is doing an apartheid wall, then we should do a Hebrew Liberation Week and we're going to go rah Israel. But that's all they have to say, because the kids there, while they do love Israel with all their heart and it's my home away from home and all these beautiful things, no one's educated them ever, because no organization has taken that on. Like we said, they learned about cherry tomatoes in 1948 in school, and then they're attacked with colonizers, apartheid, like really, really serious accusations. And they all they know is, well, I have the cherry tomato and diversity. Like there's no apartheid because Eurovision was hosted by an Arab woman way back when. Like that's
right.
The level of conversation on the two sides is so different, and there's not a single organization. I mean, there are organizations that are harming, like organizations like Hillel are actively harming by what they're doing, but there are organizations that just aren't doing anything.
Right.
And
Like,
some organizations are trying. Like I would say both ZOA and Hasbara Fellowships have a very good trip to Israel where they go into Judea and Samaria, they go into Ariel, their curriculums are very simple. So like they're doing something. So they're trying. But would I say even on those trips, like the level of education is like very, very deep. It's okay. Like on the trip, you'll do maybe 2-3 days. You'll have an educator or a staffer do a presentation, and then the rest of it is kind of these guest speakers learn about how the Knesset works. All that fun, all that. Oh, like Israel's great because we have democracy, and I know all 100 something Knesset members, but that's not helpful to the conversation. And there's literally not a single organization I can think of on college campuses that has taken on the responsibility that said, I will educate these kids so they have the tools to do what they need to do. And even the word tools is now problematic because when people say tools, they mean that slogan Zionism. Oh, well, I have the tools because I got these flags to put out in the grass to show how many rockets hit Israel. Like I know how to, organize the community for a protest, but those actually aren't the tools you need. The tools you need are the facts. And
exactly.
no one has taken on the responsibility that I am going to teach on college campuses. Not a single organization has said, I want this to be my mission. Again, for high school, they're starting. There are some, whether it's good or bad, I'm not here to judge their curriculum. I'm not an expert, but there are people that are starting to do that for high schoolers, but on college campuses, it just absolutely does not exist.
But
And
also,
I have tried to get, I'm so sorry, last thing, but I have tried to, my story, my sons, I've tried to say with the religious organizations, with those Olamids, with those mayors, with those Habads, I remember being in college camps, be like, your own sukkahs, I remember my Hillel being closed because of bomb threats. I was like, this is like a safety issue. It's like our sukkahs are being desecrated. Like you can't say that Torah and Israel aren't related when they're being desecrated with Free Gaza signs. Like you're part of your curriculum, part of your 10-week course, you got to spend 20 minutes talking about Israel every single week. And the rabbis and the organization said, no, we're all about Torah. We're not doing it. This is not our job. It's not our mission. So again, just a lack of responsibility from Jewish and Zionist organizations. They just don't want to do it.
and I think that Chabad would have been great because Chabad is such a Zionist organization. I've seen it firsthand. I was with them, all 800 trip participants. Definitely was probably the only secular person on that trip, but I was, treated very well, and I was able to ask all my stupid questions that the rabbis took seriously. So I was in JLI, and they were the only organization that I've been on that took trip participants to Judea and Samaria. Like I was in Israel with JNF, I was in Israel with the AFMDA, with other organizations. It was just them. So like, I think that, again, I'm involved with my my hometown's Chabad. And of course, I don't go there often. I live in the city. But when I do, like Israel is part of the conversation very, very often. My own rabbi and I have conversations about Israel and Zionism education. And he says, yes, like it's very important. But I just think that there's so many, obviously, like Chabad communities that it would need to come from the umbrella organization for that to filter out. But the issue too, like, I'll go after, let's be honest, Club Z. I know I've someone from Club Z has been in touch with me, several someones, and they are very rudimentary in their Zionism education as well. Like, and of course, like, I understand, like, for the younger kids, there has to be one form of Zionism education. However, when the CEO of Club Z has her videos on Instagram and uses all incorrect terminology, that's an issue. And a lot of their posts also have incorrect terminology. So it goes back to what we were saying, who is educating those educators? So, and I know, like, look, like I'm not going after those organizations without admitting my own mistakes. Like, I became an op-ed writer in 2019, right? Just a couple years ago. And I cringe when I read some of my first, not that it was bad writing, actually my first op-ed, I think was like my best piece, one of my best pieces so far. But I cringe because I made a couple mistakes that even the editors of Israel Hayom and other publications did not catch. Like I said that it was Arafat who created the Palestinians. That's not true. It was the KGB. And I had incorrectly said 1964, that's when that happened. That's not true. The PLO was created in 1964 in Cairo. It was it was only in 67 that this term emerged. So I have certainly made my share of mistakes. I'm not going to, assume that you have, but maybe you have, right? So like, it just takes us as a general community learning from our mistakes, be willing to learn and absorb more information, and then share that widely and effectively. So that's the thing. It's like, with TBTN right now, for those who don't know, yes, it's an initiative, but it's also a company, it's a business. And we, I just hired a director of educational outreach, and we're having meetings with organizations. And so like what I'm finding, some are beginning to understand that proper education is needed. We need to learn the tools, but we're also like coming up against a lot of egos. Like, oh, well, we're doing like, again, stand with us this morning. It was a very cordial meeting. Oh, but everything is fine. Really, when I post about stand with us, after having reached out to leadership, it's not like I go after these organizations without reaching out privately first. But then why did I get 50 plus messages agreeing with me, right? Like it just like wouldn't be that. Or they would admit, like, yeah, that video that you talked about publicly was in fact problematic and we took care of it. But then where's the other, where are the other tools? So I just think that.
And I have to say, there are organizations that are open to change.
Mhm.
And are like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize, let's do this. But there are organizations, and I am going to call Hillel out again, or something like APAC, right? Like APAC is absolutely saying like, no, we should call it the West Bank and Judea and Samaria. We should use it interchangeably to keep people comfortable, right? Well, we don't want, the whoever else is on the other side, we don't want to make them uncomfortable. Hillel, well, we should use these terms interchangeably so everyone feels welcome. But I think that's also hypocritical.
I love what you said. I wish I could just freeze frame what you said, because the other day on Facebook, I had like I think I commented on someone saying something. Oh, it was I'm not going to call her out because she's not as public as who we're talking about in terms of organizations, but it was a pretty, you know, uh, popular, well-known Zionist, and she had used the term Palestinians and also West Bank in the same post. And I called her out, and someone said to me, "Oh, she can do that because she's casting a wide net." So we need to talk about that, right? So these
Mhm.
organizations, they want to, and I know we've had conversations even with ZOA, we can get into that here, no holds bar. They want to cast a wide net, but like, nets have holes in them, and those holes are anti-Semitic a lot of
Yes, I love
times.
that analogy. Yes.
It's true. Like we can have a whole podcast on this whole wide net theory that's not working. So why not have a concrete box with historical facts inside? And then that box is opened to the public. And another thing too, I really want to, I know this is flowing a little bit sideways here, but just to address it, I think a lot of these organizations, especially on campus, make a mistake. They're Jewish organizations and they cater to only Jews, or it seems that way, right? Like, so, I don't know any. I mean, well, I think I've heard of like one non-Jewish person being affiliated with ZOA, maybe like one or two, but they're more in the guest speaker category. But having a very open invitation to the non-Jewish community and having
I'm
maybe,
going to have to respectfully
yeah.
push back and say that that is not true. There are,
Mhm.
first of all, it's complicated, is really what I should say, because non-Jews can definitely be allies and be pro-Israel, but non-Jews can never be Jews. You know what I mean? And so, but a
Right.
Jewish space is also inherently an Israel space, and so that's murky water already. But there are actually a lot of organizations. First of all, something like Hasbra is more geared
Mhm.
toward Jews, but ZOA, I can speak on personal behalf. When I worked there, we took non-Jews on our trips all the time. We had plenty of fellows that were non-Jews, groups like
Right.
Realize Israel, even APAC, very, very open. Hillel, no. Chabad, no. But those are Jewish
Right.
organizations. But Israel organizations normally are. And I'd go even further to say there are groups like Passages,
Mhm.
Kufi, Turning Point USA, Friends of Israel that have pro-Israel sentiments that are not Jewish, even like Christian groups, I would say. Like if you go to a Turning Point USA conference, they like say prayers in the beginning, like not Jewish prayers at the beginning of every speaker. So I just want to push back that that part of the non-Jews does exist. The critique would be that we don't do enough outreach to get, so it's not that they're not welcome in the space. The problem is that we're not doing enough outreach for it. And the other side has their messaging so clear and so powerful that by the time we get there, it's too late.
It's also the marketing, right? So like when people
Yes.
hear about, no, and I agree with all your points, but I'm talking about more like, let's say Stand With Us, right? Stand With Us, Israel, it just people like assume like you have to be Jew, like even though you don't, but like people like assume that. So just like if their marketing could be tweaked, to, and I'm not saying for all their programs, but for certain programs,
Yes.
for example, like not all Muslims are anti-Semitic, not all Muslims are anti-Israel. There are moderate Muslim groups on campuses. So having more perhaps partnerships, right? Like with these Jewish organizations reaching out to the moderate groups, putting together some kind of programming. And also, like I feel like too, like a lot of these Jewish groups, when they do talk about Arabs in Israel, it's always the singling out. It's like, oh, look, there's this Israeli singer that, like you said, like
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, performed at Eurovision one year, or there's this one Muslim judge. But in reality, 40% of pharmacists, 40% of, I think upward of 40% of doctors in Israel are Arabs. That needs to be talked about, where like Arabs are part and parcel of Israeli society. They are citizens just like Jews are. And those that needs to be acknowledged like more, like by these organizations. Or what about, no one talks about the Circassians. The Circassians are Muslims, they're not Arabs. Because they're not Arabs, they're actually forced to conscript into the army, just like the Druze are. And how come the Druze are not part of the conversation either, right? So it's like, it makes it seem like it's Arabs versus Jews, yet there are other groups who live in Israel that are never being like,
I
discussed.
would say that I do think Jewish groups are starting when I was on campus already, when I worked in campus, definitely there was like Mizrahi Heritage Week and
Mhm.
whatever. So groups are doing that. They are bringing it up. What's his name? Yosef Haddad like likes to come and like talk about like Arab involvement in Israel. So it is happening. It's just again the quality of it. When
Right.
you're
It's like
doing
the minor.
Mizrahi
Mhm.
Appreciation Week and what you're doing is like come to our event where we're learning to make Moroccan fish or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's like Moroccan fish. I mean, sure, it is Mizrahi heritage, but it's fun. It's gamey. Like it's light. It's like Zionism light, like LITE light. So they're doing it. And I do find that the groups are doing it and they are saying what you are saying. They are trying to make those points as well. They're just not doing it successfully because they're not doing it on a deep educational level. They're trying to do it through, food and games, which is great. That's lovely. But when the other argument is so strong that it doesn't matter how much rock and fish you eat, you're killing babies.
Mhm.
No one's going to care about your fish or your
By the way,
falafels or your Dead Sea mud.
at least they are talking finally about Mizrahi food and how amazing it is. Much better than Ashkenazi food, in my opinion. But so speaking of that, so like, you and I met while I was a member of the ZOA, right? Like it was kind of the tail end of that. And I forgot, was there a more official name to the group? Because I just thought it was called Young Leadership.
We
Was
called it Young Zionists of America. So it was like YZOA.
See, I forgot about that. Okay, so why ZOA? And so I'll be honest, like I felt like everything was pretty much Ashkenaz centric when I was part of ZOA. I was part of ZOA for over 5 years, right? Just the last part of it was
The young professionals.
the young professionals group. I did not hear Mizrahi culture. I'm not talking about the food. I'm talking about like bringing up history, having programming on the Mizrahi communities, of the Sephardi communities. Everything was Herzl, which like I literally am having a entire podcast on how Herzl is completely overrated, but that's like for another conversation. But because there were other Zionist leaders who, moved the needle forward, who did a lot more. It's also erasing a lot of the Mizrahi Jews who helped liberate Israel, and also he basically plagiarized a lot of his writings. But for another conversation. Anyway, so all I heard from ZUA was like, okay, Herzl, Herzl, Herzl. And then 1948, which they didn't even say liberation, right? Like when I was part of ZOA, I thought like Israel was like established, reestablished, created. Oh, I hate that terminology. I hate that term. And I don't even know if it was part of ZOA. I think it was the Israel Forever Foundation where I first even heard of San Remo Accords, right? Like, first of all, like I think the San Remo Accords should have its own holiday within the Jewish calendar. I think there should be a San
Yeah.
Remo Accords like week. Okay, like first of all. And like second of all, like it's ZOA, like how do they like not mention? I mean, I hope
I want
like
to also
obviously,
distinguish where you were in ZOA and what we're talking about here,
yeah,
because
right.
young professionals in campus are not
Of course, it's very different.
not
Yeah.
not the same. So on campus, I would like to just assure you, on campus, it does happen. They
Okay,
do
great.
talk about
Yeah.
these things, but I think it's the intention of why they're talking about them that makes it so what I call Zionism light, because they're not really talking about it to make some kind of intellectual point, and they're not talking about it, which I really want to drive this point up. They're not talking about these things to educate. They're not educating anyone, which is really the problem that we're addressing here. They're doing it because college campuses are now woke and care about diversity and
They're
care
ticking the
about
box.
and care about inclusion. And what they're doing is like, oh, well, look, we're not white, we're Mizrahi, like we're not white, we're Arab. So I guess there is positives to that, like to really start bringing up this, like, Jews are not white. But even with that, they don't do it well, because they're not saying Jews are not white, they're saying Jews are not only white.
Oh gosh. Or
You
they
know
say,
what I mean?
or
So
or they'll say like I heard the other day like,
there are
oh,
non-white Jews also. Like, look, I'm
right.
Mizrahi. So they're doing it to click that click
Mhm.
what to check that diversity and inclusion box. Like, look how different and diverse we are, because that's inherently a good quality on college campuses. No one's gonna offer, like, no one's gonna fight back against. But it's not done. That's just why it becomes Zionism light instead of really an educational add-on.
That's true. Or like the other day, I heard an organization say that Mizrahi Jews are Arab Jews. No, so like it makes it sound like Jews are Arab. Like we're not. And like, of course, like, like we're genetically similar, we're cousins. But I mean, my Mizrahi friends would be completely offended if someone called them like Arab Jews, right? So it just, I think the checking of the boxes needs to stop and the education needs to get in there. And also
Absolutely.
like understanding too that I feel like too many organizations that again, like, I talk to almost like on a weekly basis, I follow, they don't really understand the propaganda that's being hurled at the Jewish community. And like, of course, like they know Apartheid Week, but it goes a lot further than Apartheid Week,
Yes.
right? Like it goes from, like Jews were never in Israel. Jews, oh, like, my favorite, and we covered this in class, right? Like Jews are Khazars, and that's the latest popular,
Mm-hmm.
trope is like Jews are Khazars, they're all from Europe, go back to Europe, which is quite ironic because 100 years ago, the Europeans were telling Jews to go back home and go back to Palestine. So, and these organizations need to push back on that because I'll tell you, like, how many Jews I speak to who are pro Israel, who do know their facts, they'll still say, wait, aren't we Khazars? Like, wait, like European Jews, right? Like, we're from Europe. Like, no, that's where that's where your family spent the diaspora, but like
Mm-hmm.
you're not from Europe, right? Like my family's like not from, and then that doesn't make sense too. So like, wait, so you're telling me my family is from, can I list all the countries? Lithuania, Belarus,
Right.
Germany, Austria, Italy, right? Like I've just found out too that I'm 8% Sephardic. So like, I mean, are they also from, Spain or Portugal, like one of those? Like when you say like you're from somewhere, it means like your origination point, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like no family can be from 8 different places.
Right.
Like usually, like unless like you have, obviously like different, like mixing of sorts. But like Jews are Jews. Like I'm 100% Jews. I'm 100% Jewish. So clearly, like my
Mm-hmm.
origination point is quite clear. So it's that also has to be part of on-campus education, right? Like
Yes.
so when you hear like Jews of color, and of course there are many Black Jews who are mixed, right? Like their father's Jewish, their mother's Jewish, like a grandfather could be Jewish, but that's not the same thing as then saying, okay, well, there are Jews of color, but all Jews are white because skin color is not race. So getting into all that. But so let's go back to, and this has always bothered me. I'm sure bothers a lot of people. We were talking about it a little bit before, G Street and JVP. So my question to you is, when did these groups, I don't, you don't have to give me like the exact year, but like I guess like from whence did these groups come from? Like when did they emerge? And the bigger question is why? And to me, it seems like they're basically colluding with SJP and CARE. Like they might as well just be like an arm of Hamas at this point.
So what happened is J Street is also one of those organizations that's a little bit older. J Street, whew, lot to say. J Street started because Jews felt like there was no place for them and other Jews to criticize Israel. There was like no safe space, which is a bizarre concept to me. Not that there's nothing to criticize, but to me, I'm like, so many other people already do it. Like, I promise you, there's nothing that you have to say that hasn't already been said. Like, you're not adding anything to the conversation by criticizing Israel. It's already been said. Don't you worry.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, that's why J Street was created. Is they wanted a space to criticize, to love Israel, but criticize Israel, right? That's the purpose of J Street, which is hypocrisy in itself. And then they, just like every other organization, said, oh, well, we should make a campus division, a campus arm. So they created what's called J Street U, J Street University, which is the campus. And then people in J Street said, actually, sorry, it's not enough. So they created Jewish Voice for Peace, which is like very anti-Israel, extremely not Zionist, also an education moment. JVP, and this is on their charter, has what's called a non-normalization policy. So let's talk about that and what that is and why that's so dangerous. So the non-normalization policy says you cannot make Israel seem normal. You cannot make Zionism seem normal. You should do everything to non-normalize it, from systematic issues to personal. Do not have Zionist friends. Do not take Zionist classes. Do not go to Zionist groups. If you're protesting, do not engage with Zionists. Do not engage in conversation. Like, absolutely non-normalization. What they're doing is not normal. We are actively dehumanizing these people to serve our purpose. And we're going to continue doing that. And it's in our charter. So that is J Street does not have that policy. JVP does. And this, I'm not making it up. It's not campus by campus. It is publicly on their charter. SJP has this policy as well. So that is where we are with J Street and JVP on college campuses. And how does that look like? I'll tell you. At NYU, JVP wanted to do a non-normalization petition. And so they petitioned Hillel, Realize Israel, and Torch Pack, which was our APAC group at the time. And I think 50 or 52 different clubs signed on to the petition. The petition said any members of these clubs are not welcome to our meetings. We will not co-sponsor any events with these clubs. We will not have, any, even if they're just Jewish events, have nothing to do with Israel, we will not co-sponsor any events, nothing. Absolutely, absolutely do not engage. 52 groups boycotted Jewish students.
The charter you talked about with the non-normalization sounds out of a Hamas playbook.
Mm-hmm.
Completely. Like there is no, and that makes me think, like, I know we've had these conversations off record. So who's more dangerous, the anti-Israel Jewish groups or these anti-Israel Muslim groups? Like, to me personally, and like, feel free to push back on this. To me, I think it's the anti-Israel Jewish groups because how do I say this properly? It then solidifies to other people, right? Or it confirms, well, these are Jews who have that sentiment. So it must be true because a Jew is saying that. And I see that all the time online. I've seen that when I was at Columbia, say the same thing. Well, those Jews are anti-Israel, so Israel must be this demonic force of nature. Whereas the Muslim groups, and this is what I say often too, in some of my posts, terrorists will always terrorize. Like that's who they are, right? It's the policies of how to deal with terrorists that, and the point is going to make sense here, that makes a difference. And so like I was shocked when I was in Egypt and Jordan a couple months ago, end of the winter. They also deal with terrorists in their own countries, like Jordan with ISIS, when they were wreaking havoc, and then Egypt. Egypt deals with Hamas just as much as Israel. but why does, and I just posted about this too, why does Egypt not have the missile barrage that Israel does, right? Egypt goes after Hamas more than Israel does. Like, it filled their tunnels with sewage, it got rid of a lot of their tunnels, built a steel wall with the border of Gaza. Israel doesn't have a steel wall with Gaza. It closed their Rafah crossing all year except for Ramadan, except for that 1 month of Ramadan. Um, and so the reason being is because Egypt has far harsher policies against these terrorists. So Hamas knows, if we're going to send rockets into Egyptian space, they're going to level us, and we don't want that. But they know that Israel won't, right? So it's the same thing with um, these on-campus groups, right? So in a way, like, the Muslim groups, because of the propaganda that many of them grew up, in their homes and their mosques, it's sort of, and I hate to say this, but let's be real, it's like, it's sort of expected, right, that they would be anti-Israel. And that's why I know I and a lot of other Jews, like, we're always pleasantly surprised when we meet Muslims who are pro-Israel. And, like, luckily it's happening, like, more and more with frequency. But with Jews, they should know better, you know? Like, if I were to go around saying, like, like, Jews are awful and this and that, like, someone who's not Jewish would say, like, well, she's Jewish and this is what she thinks, so that must be true. Or any other race, out there, who is self-hating. So I think that these Jewish groups pose a far greater danger than any Muslim, personally.
I agree with you. I don't have that much to add. I
Okay.
agree that it has validation, and also just from personal, not even just personal experiences at NYU, but things I've seen at other college campuses. The Jews, they do more damage, right? They do go into the Hillels, they do become president of their, Jewish organizations, they become presidents of their Hillels, they get on student senate as Jewish this, Jewish that, and then they bring in this anti-Israel sentiment. So they really do become, just like you said, spokespeople for the Jewish voice, like Jewish people. And it's not an accurate one, because the majority of Jews don't feel that way.
Right.
So
that's true. Or, well, I mean, it depends where you get the statistic from, because I was reading a statistic that, like, 75% of Jews in America are pro-Israel, but then I also heard, unfortunately, the complete opposite, that, like, majority of Jews in America are not. So it depends what, what source you're looking at. I would love to delve into that, at another time. But okay, so I know that we went in depth about all of the ills that these Jewish organizations are doing. And, we have to admit, like, some of them, like, I'm sure SSI has good intention. Like, I know that they are pro-Israel, just that the delivery method is not the most effective. So, I mean, obviously, hello. We have strong opinions about that. But I would say, like, personally, I think maybe 80% of the Jewish groups on campus, save for JVP, if not now, and G Street, do have good intention. They're just, like we mentioned, systemically failing. So
I even feel, except for the ones that I've like mentioned, like the Jewish Agency in Hillel, I actually even feel a little bit more positively than you. I think they even do some good work. They just don't do enough. So the point that anyone's going to take one takeaway from what I said in this, it's great that you're tabling, and it's great that you're bringing out the soda stream, and it's great you're making your falafels and you're doing these events on campus, but it's just not enough. And organizations need to take responsibility and teach their kids, because our public schools aren't doing it. Our Jewish schools aren't doing it. Donors are giving a lot of money for these campus programs. I think it's very feasible to create real deep curriculum to arm these kids with the facts, because it's great you're teaching them how to table and how to interact and how to recruit for their events. It's all great, but let's also arm them with the facts. And no organization has really stepped up their game and said, we're going to do real education.
Exactly. And that's why Taking Back the Narrative exists. And I
Absolutely.
And I also, like, wish that, like, there were many taking back the narratives, right? Like, I mean,
yeah, for example, there's the I Center, which literally does what you said, that like, we're going to teach educators. But if you look at it, like, I'm so sorry, it's bogus. Like, they don't actually teach you anything. They're like, we just want you to be open-minded and hear all sides. And Israel, they say, like, oh, Israel's a fundamental part of Jewish education, and Jewish education is a fundamental part of Israel education. I'm like, wow, I completely agree with that. But it ends there. I'm like, okay, so where are the curriculums? Where are my resources? Where are the facts? I literally was an iFellow. I went to their conference and we talked about how our students make us feel. And I was like, but I don't feel any more prepared to go in and teach about Israel. There have been zero facts
This
shown
is
to me. I'm
not
so
right.
glad you taught me how to, I can write a curriculum. Like, I'm so glad I can do an attendance sheet now, but I still don't know how to teach. Like I do, but
Right.
if I didn't, I wouldn't. I got no skills. I did not become a better educator. Even the iCenter literally says, we are going to teach educators how to educate. I came out no better.
Right. And it's not a therapy session, right? It's not like how we feel, right? Like facts,
Yes.
like Ben Shapiro says, which is true. I don't agree with him on everything, but facts don't have feelings, which is true. Like
Yes.
we need historical facts. I also contacted the iCenter, asked for a meeting because what I saw on their website was completely subpar. And in fact, borderline dangerous, like what they are showing as facts with all their anti-Semitic terminology. So we can go on and on about many other problems that we see, but in the interest of time, I would love to hear your top two suggestions, um, what these organizations can do better. And then I'll give my top two.
Yes, I think the first is, as somebody that works in nonprofits, worked in nonprofits, has a master's in nonprofits, my first suggestion to any of the listeners out there would be like, put your money where your mouth is. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure a lot of people out there already give to this organization and that organization. As a donor, you have the power to make that money go to a specific place. So
Mhm.
say if I'm giving you $1,000 a year, I want this specifically to go to building education curriculum. And as a donor, I deserve to see what that curriculum looks like. So don't put money blindly into organizations. Make sure that it is concrete, and like ask your kids, ask your grandkids, nephews, uncles, like, are you on campus? Where are you? What organizations are you a part of? And reach out to them. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing would be a call on also organizational leadership. Really, we have to start asking for actual education. I mean, having pins and tote bags and water bottles and stickers on your computer, it's not enough anymore. So we just really need to have a call of education, both in verbally, in writing, through emails, and also with our donations.
Those are excellent points. So I also would love to add that it's okay to take money out. Like I remember I was, giving as an alumni to Columbia, and I saw what was going on. So I pulled my donations, and
Mhm.
I had gotten so many emails, like from their what's it called, from their donor department, like, oh, like, would you like to reinstate your donations? And I said I'm not donating to an anti-Semitic institution.
Absolutely.
And that was that. And then like they had the audacity like 3 years later to ask me again, and then I replied with an even stronger worded email. Another thing too is what I'm seeing also, like I saw this in person, I'm seeing this just like overall, this I would say dangerous competition of sorts, like every organization, and I get it.
Yes.
I worked in nonprofits. Well, I worked for Weill Cornell, so it was not in the Jewish world, but like, I do understand. Like I've been on young leadership boards. I get it. Like, everyone's fighting for donors. A lot of these donors are shared across boards. However, I think in terms, and it's fine to have competition with each other in the adult space, perfectly understandable. However, I think when it comes to on-campus education, let's stop this competition, come together,
Yes.
form one curriculum that's then universal. And the difference, like what could differentiate these groups, is have different programming, right? So like everyone is educated at the same, they all parcel out the same information, but let's say like ZOA does one thing with this information, Hillel does another, SSI does another. Everyone puts their unique spin. When I say spin, I don't mean a configuration of facts. I mean, like presenting it differently.
Mhm.
That is what could make this interesting, could make this effective, and would really educate the campus community. And I also think that, like again, like working across the spectrum, in terms of like I just had a meeting, like I mentioned this morning, with Stand With Us, and I did learn that Stand With Us does a lot with the Hindu community in New York. I had no idea. it's not something that they really advertise. So why not on campus? Like, like work with the Hindu Student Association,
Mhm.
cross promote. Israel and India has the same enemies, has dealing with the same issues in terms of terrorism, uh, a lot of times even with propaganda, right? So find friends in likely and unlikely places. And I don't know, just to bring in also non-anti-Semitic Muslims, like more and more, and not like the same cycle, which I've been seeing for the past
And
10
also the
years.
way they're brought
Mhm,
in, we also
mhm,
have to be careful because if you're brought in because we want to light candles together and do, Shabbat
mhm.
and slogan Zionism and Hasbara, it's also not effective.
Exactly, right, and, like, have it from their opinion, again, like, I learned so much, like, every time I see a post from I will plug him for years to come, Mohammed Kabia. Every time I see a post of him, like, I've been doing this for 9 years. I don't wanna say I know everything, I think it's not possible to be an expert on everything. I think that when you consider yourself an expert, you're dead, right? Because there's always, like, room to learn. But, like I know enough to obviously have launched this initiative, to have taught a class to close to 100 people, right? You were part of that, and I appreciate that. But every time I read his posts, I learn something about Arabs in Israel, about Jewish history, even about Israeli history, about what's going on. So I think there's just you're right, there's a better way of engaging, these leaders. And it's not just Muhammad Kabir, there's so many. Like you and I, we did slides about,
Hmm.
a litany of Arab Zionists. And not to, like I think there's still some kind of trepidation. Like either these organizations like bring in these Arab Zionists as this like token monkey in a way, like, oh my gosh, like look what we found, we found this like Arab and he's pro-Israel. But like they're not that rare of a find, especially these days. And so like, I think just integrating them a lot more realistically would really help too. And then the
Agreed.
funding, right? Like,
Agreed.
like maybe reject funding from federations, which
Agreed.
don't do don't do much good to the Zionism space at all. And I get it. Like, okay, I'll putting it out there. Club C, is moving more to the left because of their funders. And like, yes, I understand, like money is paramount when it comes to nonprofits. There's a lot of money out there in the Jewish space, especially if you're an organization with a 501c3. Say no to federations or modify their their angle. Say like, okay, like I'm glad to accept this, let's say
And we
$50,000.
have to stop saying that what we're saying is right wing.
Mhm.
Calling Judea and Samaria is
It's
not
not
right
right
wing,
wing.
and calling it
Exactly.
West Bank is not left wing. It's just what
Right.
it is. So we also have to stop saying that what we're saying is radical and right wing. So many Hillels, I don't want to work with ZOA. You're too right wing because you don't believe in a two-state solution. We have to absolutely even remove that terminology. What we are saying, it's not right, it's not left, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's
It's
not
fact.
Likud, it's not Merkaz, it's not any. It's just it's correct, and that is it.
But like it's also like it just like I'm seeing it, I'm just sharing what I see, like the organizations that are taking money from federations within a year, suddenly it's like, oh, like, well, it's not right.
Federation doesn't like this term and that term, and that's it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the thing. And like, like with Club C, like suddenly, like, now they are considering it radical to not say Palestinians,
Hmm.
which is crazy because Club Z, I thought was the hope that
Yeah.
we've had. So, just like being more strategic is the right word of funding, and just understanding like, it all starts with education. And I
Yes.
know like I learned everything, no, not everything. I learned I course corrected myself through education,
Yes.
historical education. And if I continued to listen to the propaganda that I was exposed to, I still would be anti-Israel at
Hmm.
this
No
point.
matter how many water bottles and pins they
No.
gave you. Absolutely.
And saying humus not Hamas, like, yeah, it's catchy, like you said, which is what SSI
But
does.
it doesn't change hearts and minds.
Not at all. Because like, well, first of all, like a lot of nationalities enjoy hummus.
Yeah.
And Israel did not invent hummus. Like they have delicious ones. Like I've tasted it. I liked it better than the ones that I had in Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt. but it still does not make
Right. And it's so
it a
great that you have a
pushback.
sticker on your water bottle or laptop that says Jews are from Judea. That's lovely. But then the person with that sticker, a student, a high school student, a college student, has to be armed with a what if someone asks you about that sticker? Do you know what to say? Did someone prepare you what to say? And that's where the problem lies.
Right. And then also like not separating Judea and Samaria, like those organizations who do say it, thankfully, they'll treat it like it's not part of Israel. It's like there's Israel and then there's Judea and Samaria. Like as if it's like a separate like entity. Like, no,
Mhm.
part of Israel, legally, historically, ancestrally, part of it,
Yep.
physically, even. So I just think that, these organizations are serious, and more for our listeners, like, for those of listeners who support these organizations and find this topic to be important, and the methodology that these organizations are utilizing to be problematic, to reach out to them, send an email, maybe, donate a little bit, less, like
Mhm.
have a contingency with your donation. That's effective also. Because, if this continues, there's going to be
No Zionists left.
not only that, but like there's going to be like no way to turn it around.
Yeah.
Right. Like it, I feel like it's been going on maybe less than 10 years at this point. Like, I mean, you could correct,
Mhm.
but if this is going to go on for another generation, then
That's it.
that's
I
it.
completely agree. I completely agree.
So I want to thank you for your time and also
Thank
your
you.
expertise. Like, I know, like I learned a lot. Like, I didn't know anything about the Jewish Agency. I definitely learned about the JVP charter, which I am still reeling my head over. Just it was great to like have that in-depth uh, perspective, right? Like you are younger than me. You've actively been part of these organizations. So I thank you for your time.
Thank
And
you so much for having me.
of course, and we will be sharing this next week. So have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.